Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hardworking Americans and their families? You will. This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefit in benefit plan. Now prepare to learn, plan, save, and protect with the FIA Group.
Hey, everybody. Hello. It's me, Ron Peck, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the FIA Group. I am so excited. You know, Pat, I can't see you, but I can feel your presence producing yet again one of the award-winning Empowering Plans podcasts with the FIA Group. I say award-winning because we won the award for my mom's favorite podcast. It's also the only podcast she listens to. Hi, Mom. Why am I so excited, Pat? Well, there are 3 reasons I'm so excited. Number 1, I have not participated in a podcast in some time. I've been resting my vocal cords, drinking room temperature water, only eating the orange Skittles, and I'm feeling good, like a superstar, to be back on stage. So this is exciting for me. For those of you who have suffered the endless podcasts featuring Brady the Bizarro, welcome back to reality. 2, I am excited to be talking about this topic today, the No Surprises Act. For those who have not checked out our blog, read the industry articles, looked on LinkedIn, my name is being tied to the No Surprises Act. And it should be no surprise that I've got some opinions I want to share. So for those of you who have not read those articles, jump on. In fact, I think Benefits Pro magazine featured a 3-part series. It's funny. It was actually one article that I wrote and they got back to me and said it was too long. And so I negotiated for a Lord of the Rings trilogy breakout. And there you go, sharing the truth. And the 3rd reason I am so excited today is because I am doing a podcast with Jennifer McCormick. Hi, Jen.
Hi. Wow, my full name. Usually when people use my full name, it's because I'm in trouble. So hopefully I'm not in trouble.
Well, I'm hoping that people are going to look for you on LinkedIn, and I don't want there to be any mistakes because there's the one and only Jennifer McCormick, and then there's all the imitators and fake accounts. Look for the blue check mark. The reason I'm so excited to talk about this topic with Jen is just that, Jen, you and I have known each other for the better part of 2 decades at this point, and I think that we work together so well. You're the yin to my yang, and when it comes to something like the No Surprises Act, it really is, there's sort of a political business, just nasty, dinner table talk. And then there's the actual nitty gritty reality of what these plan administrators and plan sponsors need to do to be compliant. And when it comes to just, chewing the fat about anything, that's where I step in and just kind of, get up on my soapbox and rant. But then when it's time to actually, get down to it and decide what do we actually need to do, that's when you step in. So what a perfect day to talk about the No Surprises Act, and what a perfect person with which to do it.
I'm honored, Ron. Thank you.
Please, the honor is all mine. And of course, we're both honored to be with Pat the Man Santos, the triple threat, the triple P, Pat the podcast producer, the man, the myth, the legend, the dungeon master, the king of podcasts. Hey, Pat. So anyway, No Surprises Act. Oh my gosh, this thing is crazy, right? I don't know what's crazier, the No Surprises Act or the reaction from our industry, right? Depending on who you ask, it's something different. It's kind of like, chupacabra, right? Where they're like, oh, it's like a giant goat with fangs that eats my goats and chickens. It's like, no, it's a giant lizard with 2 heads. Depending on who you ask, it looks different. Well, the No Surprises Act is the mythical beast of our industry right now. Some people will tell you that it outlaws balance billing, right? Because it outlaws balance billing, we no longer need PPO networks to protect our members from balance billing. Therefore, everyone should dump all their networks, make everything out of network, reap the benefits of this outlawing of balance billing, and use a reference-based pricing for all of your claims. Huzzah! And then you get some people who say, no, you misunderstood completely. This law punishes you if something is out of network. If anything is out of network, you're going to be forced to pay 100% of bill charges. So everything should be in network to avoid the cruel mistress that is the No Surprises Act. So be sure to expand the size of your network. So we got the two ends of the spectrum here. And as with most things in life, this actually falls somewhere in the middle. First and foremost, I don't care how many times you've heard me say it before, I'm not going to go crazy about brown squirrels and squirrels. How about this one? Not every attorney is Jen McCormick, but Jen McCormick sure is an attorney. So what am I trying to say here? Balance bills cover a large spectrum, a large group, a large silo of claims. Some of them, a specific subset, are surprise balance bills. And this law applies to those. For all the other types of balance bills that are not surprise balance bills, this rule doesn't apply. And I could tell you, just working with a lot of reference-based pricing plans and out-of-network claims and repricers, the really, really big claims usually are some sort of elective procedure or tied to some sort of major chronic illness, and don't necessarily fall under the umbrella of a surprise balance bill. This is particularly true for plans that don't use a network, because every claim is out of network and most claims don't actually sort of meet the threshold to be a surprise. So therefore, they're not surprise balance bills. But for the vast majority of payers who still use a PPO network, those run-of-the-mill claims are generally going to be in network and therefore wouldn't even be balance billed regardless of the type. And this rule is really meant to target the plans that are in network, do use a network, have a PPO, and people get surprised by the occasional balance bill because they thought they were covered by a network. And the three examples are air ambulance, med flight, because those providers generally don't have network agreements. Emergencies, where you're whisked away to an out-of-network facility. This is particularly impactful if you're away from home on vacation or something like that. And then the worst of the bunch, the innie-outie, right? That's the in-network facility, but the out-of-network specialist. It's my favorite. It's like, why pick your favorite type of belly button when you can have both? And unfortunately, that's what these providers did. You have an out-of-network specialist at an in-network facility, and we know the dirty dozen, right? We know all about the anesthesiologist and the specialist that would be out-of-network at an in-network facility. And in a nutshell, what this law says, for those who are still a little confused about it, first and foremost, it's not a law in and of itself. It's an amendment of an existing law that came packaged with a new consolidated omnibus in response to COVID and some other political needs. So, it came in on a Trojan horse and got deposited into an existing law. So, much like a virus, it can't exist on its own. It needs a host, right? Isn't that such a timely comparison? Anyway, and what this new sort of amendment to an existing law says is that when you're dealing with one of these surprise balance bills that I just mentioned, guess what, plan? You pay it like you normally would. Nothing special to see here. Move along, move along. You use UNC for out-of-network, use your usual customary language for out-of-network. You use reference-based pricing for out-of-network, use your reference-based pricing for out-of-network. They are not affecting how the plan initially prices and pays out-of-network claims. It really only matters or kicks in from a pricing perspective if and when the provider balance bills the patient. So if the provider accepts that out-of-network payment as payment in full, close the book, put it away, move on, enjoy your nap. If, however, the provider does not accept it as payment in full, in the past, they would balance bill the patient, assuming that they didn't file an appeal, or if they did, they lost. They would then balance bill the patient. They can't do that anymore in these specific scenarios. So instead, what they do is they submit basically a demand for additional payment to the plan, and now the plan and provider need to resolve it within 30 days. And if they don't, that provider then has 4 days to trigger independent dispute resolution, IDR, which is basically just arbitration. And the arbitrator, this decision maker, in essence, is supposed to meet all these standards and thresholds of knowledge and awareness of the industry. And Jen, we keep joking about where are they going to find these people? Because you're not allowed to have any bias. But the only people I know with the requisite amount of knowledge to act as sort of this arbitrator in IDR either work for the hospitals and the health systems or work for the payers. So I don't know where you're going to find someone who's this, professor that's completely unbiased. But that's neither here nor there.
Either. I think that's really interesting, though. This is one of the requirements, and there needs to be that accreditation by HHS in the first place to even qualify to be in this position. Not only is this going to create this backlog, but finding somebody who is going to be able to meet each and every one of the criteria that are outlined is nearly impossible. So, we're still a good 6.5-ish months out from when this is supposed to take effect. So there still can be some more time for them to modify how this is supposed to play out and what the credentialing is going to look like. But that's one of my biggest fears, is really who is going to fall into this bucket. We have a lot of talk about who's going to win, whether this is a provider or plan biased type of situation, but we really don't know, because we really don't know who's going to be able to act in that capacity to make these decisions.
You know, and I would actually say, and it's interesting, I think that the rarity or the scarcity of arbitrators who can step in and do this is going to create a bit of a backlog and a delay. And I do believe that a backlog or a delay tends to play in favor of the payer, because, you know, time is money, and money plus time equals more money, right? So if we're holding on to the money waiting for this IDR to take place because there's so few accredited arbitrators for IDR purposes, you know, the provider may be thinking, you know what, forget this, I can't wait anymore, let's make a deal on the side. And mind you, you can continue to negotiate even while the IDR is taking place. So the 30-day window, when that 30-day window shuts, that doesn't mean that you can't talk anymore, right? There's not a restraining order. It just means that now you could trigger IDR, but the negotiations can continue. And if you negotiate during IDR, you just terminate the IDR. The last thing I want to say about IDR real fast, independent dispute resolution, is that it's baseball style arbitration, which means both sides have to come in with a number and you stick with that number. There's no meeting in the middle. There's none of that negotiation. It's I come in with my number, you come in with your number. We both make the case as to why our number is the more fair of the two. And then that arbitrator is going to pick between the two. Like I said before, you could potentially negotiate a number somewhere in the middle on the side, but that's not officially part of the IDR. So with all that being said, you know, the last thing I want to mention before I turn it over to you, Jen, is people ask, okay, so what does this mean, right? How is this going to impact us? Is it going to make reference-based pricing more popular, less popular? Am I going to have to change what my plan says, how I process claims? You don't technically have to do anything, right? Like I said before, you can keep paying out-of-network claims how you always have. It's just you need to be prepared for this repercussion down the line if the provider doesn't accept it as payment in full. That being said, one of the key elements that an arbitrator in IDR is going to use to determine which of the two numbers is more fair is the median network rate. And I think that that number is really important for a few reasons, right? One is if you're a payer and you just want to cut to the chase and pay the amount that you would be forced to pay in arbitration anyway, some payers and some plan administrators have said to me that they're going to adjust their language so that in certain situations, these out-of-network claims are paid at the median network rate. So when you go in front of the arbitrator at IDR and he's supposed to or she's supposed to consider the median network rate, you can say, that's exactly what I paid. I win. So, you know, that's cutting to the chase. Now, that number is probably a little bit higher than you'd like it to be, especially if you're someone who's accustomed to a reference-based pricing approach to out-of-network claims. And then you have those who, you know, they're taking the approach that I think I need to get some direct contracts in place. Maybe I've been doing reference-based pricing for everything. I don't want to have to go through this for every claim, at least the claims that are surprise claims. I'm going to get a direct contract. Well, first and foremost, having a direct contract isn't going to help you if it's an emergency outside that geographic area, right? You know, if you've got one hospital system that's direct contracted and somebody has an emergency, you know, you better hope that they can tell the ambulance, can you go to hospital 1 instead of hospital 2? You know, short of that, you know, your contract's not going to mean anything if they get taken to the wrong hospital. Air ambulance, same deal. Doesn't matter if you have a narrow network if it doesn't include the air ambulance. And then number 3, even if you have a direct contract, unless that contract specifically addresses out-of-network specialists at that in-network facility, you're still going to be stuck with surprise balance bills. And the last thing I want to say about this last piece with the network and the contract is I actually think that on its face, the intent was to get people to expand their networks and increase the number of contracts they have to reduce the number of out-of-network claims and therefore reduce the number of balance bills. But I think one of the unintended consequences of using median network as sort of this basis for payment is the fact that if I'm a provider now, you know, I'm going to look at all of my contracts and I'm going to say, you know what, I want to renegotiate my contracts. I want to offer you a smaller discount because these contracts that I have with you, Jen, sort of set the standard. They are the basis of the median network rate. That's going to impact all the out-of-network negotiations I have with other payers. Not you, I have a contract with you. But other payers, they're going to look at our deal and they're going to use that against me. So I now need to be tougher with you so that I raise the bar because we all rise with the tide. So I actually potentially think that this could hurt negotiations individually and network-wide as providers look to increase that median network rate to benefit them in these negotiations. And then one other thing, people say, well, what about Medicare as a threshold? You could use Medicare as a basis for your payment, but you need to be able to come into arbitration, IDR, and explain why it's a fair price, where the number comes from. Just saying, I pay Medicare plus 40%. Okay, well, why is that a fair number? Because Medicare said so. That's not going to do it, right? The arbitrator is not allowed to consider Medicare as sort of this be-all, end-all. It's not something they're allowed to consider. So you need to be able to reverse engineer how CMS comes up with their pricing and explain why Medicare plus 40 is a fair price, completely independent of Medicare. If you can explain why it's a good price, a fair price, without using the word Medicare, you may be okay. And interesting enough, I think that the reason they didn't want Medicare to be a threshold is because a lot of entities, lawmakers, they are very much against Medicare for all. Politically, they are against Medicare for all, both sides of the aisle. And any law that puts reliance on Medicare to dictate what is and is not fair, it's a step in the wrong direction. Because it's easy to say, well, if we are all paying Medicare rates, why don't we just use Medicare in the first place? So a step in the wrong direction was the reason why Medicare is sort of a dirty word when it comes to IDR. Now, I just covered a lot, but didn't really say anything, because you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, that's a lot of really interesting information, but what am I supposed to do about it? The key thing that you're supposed to do in response to this law don't even relate to the political foundation or the impact on networks, and have a lot more to do with your documentation, your transparency, and your advanced DOBs. And Jen, I know you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like you noted, this is just one piece of the transparency rules that are going to be put into place in the coming months. But when it comes to the NSA, something to consider too, outside of this documentation and making sure that we can explain without using the word Medicare like some sort of really fun puzzle for us to put together, is taking a look now at our current documents, like you said, and seeing how we define our current payment parameters, what is included, what is there, would we be able to defend it, and how so, with what evidence, what background, what sources, what strategies can we use to really validate what our processes are. But even more than that, looking at the payment parameters, something else for us to consider too is, as we've been talking about this, or as you've been talking about this, Ron, we're looking at these surprise bills, and not only is this going to be something that we're going to have to be able to defend and ensure that we can negotiate, but we now know that for those particular categories, that the payment in those situations is going to have to count towards the individual's in-network out-of-pocket amount. So we're needing to make sure that we can not only calculate how the payment is going to be derived, but also when we're looking at the cost sharing for the individuals, how that's going to be calculated. And even more than that, we're looking at these categories too. And Ron, you mentioned air ambulance. Maybe we need to take a look at how we're actually defining what an emergency service is and what falls in that category and what should be excluded from that category. So while we do have some time, those are things we absolutely need to be thinking about, how we're defining our payment parameters, what our out-of-pocket limit is going to include or exclude, and how it is that we're defining emergency services and air ambulance to make sure that our documentation aligns with the processes that we're going to be utilizing to ensure that if we get to the point to IDR, that we actually can back it up with what our documents are. And the last thing I'll say about NSA here too is that there's another little piece in here too that people need to remember as we're coming closer to renewals. Hard to believe it's already the middle of April, but there are requirements for our ID cards. So while everyone should have an ID card now that tells them the relevant information, now there's statutory guidance that is requiring plans to put certain information on their ID cards. That didn't necessarily exist before, and while it was a best practice, it wasn't required. So now plans beginning on the first plan year on or after 1/1/2022, they're going to have to put their plan deductible information on those cards, their in-network and their out-of-network deductible amount. Also, they're going to have to put on their telephone numbers and website information about how and who they can contact for assistance. So taking a look at the design of that card to make sure all that information is going to fit on that card is something that should be done now, and making sure you're having the right information. So outside of the NSA, there are other transparency rules that are going to require some of those documentation changes too, Ron. Certain things like the continuity of care, and making sure that we not only can set that up and establish a process for that, but our plan would allow us to continue that care for that 90-day period as permitted by the particular facts and circumstances under the current plan language. Taking a look at the advanced EOB rules, those are going to require us to make some changes to our system to make sure that we can not only ensure that we're counting the information, providing the correct notice, but that we are avoiding all of those stiff penalties. For a lot of these things that we're talking about today, there are ERISA penalties that could come into play if we don't abide by what the rules are requiring us to do. So while there are lots of unknowns, there are a lot of things that we can be doing now to put ourselves in the best situation possible. So when it does come time to these rules going into effect, in whatever form that might be, we know exactly what needs to get changed and why it needs to get changed and how we can defend it. So if there is a question or if there is a concern, we have everything in place right now to prepare ourselves for that defense.
You look at a lot of plans, both from a consulting standpoint, but also from a drafting standpoint.
I do.
Yeah, then that's it, the end. No, and it's a two-part question, so I'm trying to think how to phrase it properly. But question number one, how many plans would you say are more or less compliant with these new requirements? And assuming that your answer is going to be none, Ron, the second question then is, how many have either the data or the tools necessary to reach compliance with just a few edits versus who are going to need some major work?
Yeah, there are not many, if any, that are compliant with these rules now, or at least in a way that can support them to ensure that should they need to defend their actions, that they actually have something to support it and wouldn't immediately lose if it got to the IDR process. But as of right now, there are so many different tools and things that we need to put in place besides just plan language, whether it's systems, but more importantly, the strategies for how we're going to be able to defend these, and what tools and other entities out there are going to be in the best position to help us to defend our actions and defend where we're coming to get this information. So this is going to be a collaborative process, and this isn't going to be as easy as let me mark up the plan and change the definition of emergency or air ambulance to make sure that it's in compliance with what the NSA requires, but us to look at more of a long-term, bigger picture strategy so that we are all cooperating and coordinating to get every little piece into action and appropriately documented, noted, and all of the communication to everyone involved.
So it's interesting because as I look at sort of preparing for this rollout, there's the before the claim is received, there's while the claim is in hand, and then there's after the claim is received. And before the claim is received, you need to decide, one, what kind of pricing strategy are you going to use for these out-of-network claims? Two, you need to make sure that you have a process in place to receive what is required to be submitted by the provider, to review what is provided by the provider, and three, ensure that what you then send back both to the provider, the information you provide to the patient, your pricing, transparency, where it's located, its accessibility, ensuring that it's up to date, all of that. That's all prep work before the first claim is even received. And then after the claim is actually received, ensuring that you're processing and paying the claim as close to the terms or what you originally provided preemptively as this is what we cover and this is how we process the claim, to make sure that you're not sort of misrepresenting early on what you ultimately end up doing, paying those claims, doing it in a timely fashion, and providing, again, all the backing for that determination when you paid that claim. And then post-payment, ensuring that when that initial sort of pushback from the provider comes in, that you're taking advantage of every minute that's afforded you, because, we have a lot of balance bills that part of the strategy is to take your time, go back and forth. Some you want to just get them done ASAP, but others, time is your ally. And with this 30-day sort of window before they can trigger IDR, they're taking away one of our most valuable tools, which is time. So you only have 30 days, not 30 months. You better have a strategy in place for when that claim first arrives, because every second counts.
No, you're absolutely right. Time is a gift.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we are using it wisely and we spend the time that we have now before the rollout of this rule to be prepared, that we have all those tools, we have all those pieces in place, and that we are here to help every step of the way.
Awesome. So we will keep everybody updated. I appreciate your deep, meaningful commentary. You know, I'm going to go kiss my family now. I'm a treasure. Listen, I appreciate it. Jen, Pat, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We are out of time, but as always, it's been such a pleasure. On behalf of myself, the entire FIA Group family, our partners and friends in the industry, and all of the plan participants and their families that are counting on us, I thank you so much for your time and energy today. Be well, and thank you for joining the FIA Group's Empowering Plans podcast.